So I'm going to very much build on Ling Zhang's commentary up to there, talking a little bit about how we can better work together. But let me start with a disturbing thought. No radical innovation was ever designed. So let's just think about what the implications of that are for a minute. It's got profound implications for policymakers, institutions designing solutions to tackle climate change. Top-down policies and inventions simply won't work, as we're discovering, to our costs. Just look at the picture. Who designs snowflakes? And yet they're complex and beautiful. My research shows that radical innovation emerges in co-production with its environment. Now, before we go further, let me just explain what I mean by the word environment, using economics Nobel laureates Herbert Simon's analogy. So just imagine we were radio tracking a yacht running up a narrow channel. Well, you might wonder why on earth it doesn't just take a straight line, but rather zigs and zags and moves in a slightly unpredictable way. But of course, unseen are the shifting winds, the tidal eddies, the shallow rocks, let alone the knowledge in the skipper's head about the best course to take for the eddies and other bits and pieces. Of course, we can't see that. And as scientists, all we've got is the trace on the map, and it makes no sense to us. So environment, in many ways, are all those things that are unseen, that have a massive influence on where we go. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we empower the emergence through co-creation, and why our current models of looking at competition are not the right way to innovate in a complex environment. So what we can see here, at the bottom, we've got profit, and at the top we've got purpose. So profit, the standard model, economic model, is that we compete. We fight each other for a share to do whatever we can. Move part way up there, and we're looking at cooperate. Now, I define cooperate essentially as being competition that has been tamed by regulation, tamed by rules, tamed by maybe the unions agreeing that we're going to do this, so we don't just have a bun fight in the business. Tamed by a pricing mechanism so that we're not ripping off our suppliers to the extent that we can. But we can go beyond that to co-creation. Co-creation exists when we get our heads together and say, how can we do stuff differently? And there are 5 main factors that affect that. So the first of these is our ontology, a terribly research-orientated word, and I'm sorry for that. But at the bottom of it, in the sort of competition world, we look at things in an objective way. So with our yacht, we're looking at the movement going up and down without necessarily understanding it. At the top, we're looking at it in a subjective way, asking the person on that boat, why did you take the course that you did, which provides better understanding. But to understand the environment, we need to give it the power to speak. We need to listen without judgment to views and ideas that may directly challenge our own expertise. And this can be very difficult in a world that bestows enormous social capital on expertise. Just think about our own institution here. We value expertise, experience, and people from the right sort of background above all others. Moving on, so that's the power. Moving on, thinking about the relationship. The relationship is the power to extend our research method and relationships with our participants. So when we do our research, how often do we ask questions of our participants? And how often do we ask our participants what questions we should be asking them? Co-creation services the questions that we never thought to ask. And often it's those questions that bring the answers that we can never really think of on ourselves. So think of it this way. For those of you who are familiar with Lev and Wenger's communities of practice stuff, they perpetuate the status quo. And so all that they're talking about in the apprenticeship model of learning is that we're teaching people stuff that we've already known. It makes it very hard to change. So now let's move on to our view of resources. Okay, so at the bottom of it, we're talking about scarce resources, and at the top, abundant. Now, just let me explain what that means. So in the view of scarce resources, we're saying, how much of the pie can I get for myself? At the abundant end of it, we're saying, forget about the slice of the pie. How can we build a pie factory? It means breaking the rules. It means forgetting about the constraints and the boundaries, and resetting our view about how on earth we could do things in a radically different way. And finally, we need to think about motivation. At the end of the day, motivation is what makes people change what they do. If we think about Elon Musk and his brilliance with Tesla, it was to reframe electric vehicles as desirable things rather than the golf carts with which they were previously associated. We need to do the same thing with the environment. Instead of saying, let's wear a hair shirt, let's just stop eating meat, let's do all the things that we hate doing and stop doing all the things we love doing, how can we reframe it in such a way that we actually want to do better things? Motivation drives adoption of new ways of working. Great innovation helps people to achieve the things they desire but struggle with, but that only works when it's innovation done with people rather than to them. So cast your mind back to a few years to the huge army of volunteers that mobilised and self-organised to support the most vulnerable in the early stages of the pandemic. Had we relied on government, we'd probably still be signing off on the risk assessment. None of this is rocket science. I feel very privileged to work with some of the best and motivated young minds on the planet, and I'm thrilled to be researching better ways of helping them realise their untapped potential. And I'm convinced that by co-producing the future with our environment, we will overcome the follies of previous generations, who either ignored the environment as an externality or plundered it for their own gain. Right, over to Colin.